Basra lay under a sky that had forgotten color. The river moved like a slow pulse through the city's dim heart, reflecting the orange haze of distant refineries and the shivering light of generators too tired to keep their promise. From above, it looked almost peaceful, an exhausted peace, the kind that lingers when nothing is left to win. At 00:53 hours, a reconnaissance aircraft climbed through thin cloud, its engines softened by altitude, its mission ordinary. The crew moved with the quiet rhythm of men who had done this too many times to expect wonder. Routine was safety, and safety was survival. The cockpit lights glowed a faint amber. The navigator, a man named Karim, traced their path across the delta, while the pilot adjusted altitude by instinct more than instruction. Below, the city blinked like a dying constellation. The radio was open, tuned to command, murmuring the usual codes in a tone that comforted through repetition. But amid the familiar static, a brief pause arrived, half a breath, and then a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't distortion nor feedback, but a pattern. 5 tones. Pause, 3 tones. Pause, 1. The rhythm was too exact, too deliberate to be noise. Karim frowned and adjusted the dial. The tones repeated, softer this time, their pitch flattening as though descending through water. The pilot asked ground control for confirmation, but the channel returned clean. No anomaly, no transmission. The signal existed only in their cockpit. The navigator logged the event in calm handwriting, marking it as possible interference from atmospheric refraction. The explanation felt comfortable, believable, even as a strange vibration filled the instruments, a faint pulse that matched the beat of their own hearts. Outside, the city dimmed further, power grids dipping in synchrony as if listening. From their altitude, the river formed a dark mirror, splitting the city into 2 halves of flickering gold. Through the headset, the static deepened into a whisper. Not words, not quite, but the cadence of speech. Karim turned the gain down and listened harder. For a moment, he thought he heard coordinates, repeated softly, the voice more human than machine. But when he checked the tape, the sound had vanished. Below, Basra lay still. The wind over the marshlands slowed, and even the scattered dogs stopped barking. The plane continued on course, the hum steady, yet the cockpit felt subtly colder. The pilot exhaled, fogging the inside of his visor, and muttered that the air felt wrong, too heavy, like a pause stretched too far. Karim made no reply. He was watching the horizon, where faint blue light bled through the haze, outlining clouds from beneath as if the earth itself had decided to glow. The aircraft banked south to capture footage. The onboard camera panned across the city, recording silent geometry, bridges, rooftops, reflections, until the lens caught something impossible. The power grid below had flickered into shape, a sequence of lit districts forming perfect lines, then shifting. The formation matched the tone pattern they'd heard earlier. 5, 3, 1. For a moment, Basra itself seemed to transmit. Then the lights blinked out, plunging everything back into ordinary darkness. The pilot's voice broke the silence, quiet but steady. Mark that time. The clock read 01:42 hours. Karim wrote the digits carefully, underlining them once. When he replayed the tape seconds later, the pattern was gone. The radio carried only the familiar hum of open air. Yet in the cabin, a faint sound persisted, the subtle vibration of metal remembering resonance. They adjusted altitude, circling once more, though neither man could say why. The compass drifted by 4 degrees west, correcting itself too quickly to register as malfunction. Karim checked the altimeter, 7,000 meters, then 0, then back again. The needles trembled briefly, then steadied, as though uncertain of their own loyalty to physics. Interference, the pilot said, forcing a chuckle. Probably the storm front over Kuwait. But there was no storm, only the stillest air the desert had ever held. They began recording manually, radio, instrument readouts, video, standard protocol for anomalies. Their tone remained professional, but something unspoken had settled between them, a quiet agreement that the sky had started speaking back. At 01:56, the transmission returned, softer now, almost intimate. 5 tones again, but the final note extended, like a breath drawn in rather than exhaled. Beneath it, faint speech wove through static. This time, the pilot removed his headset and listened with bare ears. The words were indecipherable, but strangely rhythmic, like someone reading from a manual that no longer existed. Karim replayed it, recording on a secondary reel. The second playback produced a hum lower in pitch, yet the waveform on the recorder remained identical to the first. He looked up, uneasy. "It's not a signal," he said quietly. "It's an answer." Outside the window, the desert had gone pale. The horizon shimmered with low heat, even in the cold of night, and the air carried no sound at all. The pilot flicked the landing lights on, though there was nothing to see. No clouds, no threat, only endless clarity. They flew in silence, letting the instruments do the thinking. The signal didn't return, but the hum in the cabin stayed, quiet and persistent, following the rhythm of their breath. Below, the Tigris curved like a sleeping serpent through the dark. Somewhere far beyond, the world remained unaware that the first coded whisper had already been sent, waiting for someone, anyone, to understand its language. The signal should have ended with the flight, but it didn't. In the days that followed, Basra's night air carried a low pulse, soft enough to mistake for wind, yet steady enough to count. Technicians in a radar station 40 miles north logged it by accident, an artifact between frequencies, sitting just beyond the usual range of civilian bands. The engineers called it a ghost band, the kind of echo that lingers after storms or solar flares. But the weather was calm, the sky clean, the instruments obedient. Still, the pulse repeated. 5. Pause. 3. Pause. 1. At first, the pattern was harmless. A curiosity passed between night shifts to break the silence. But soon, other stations reported the same anomaly. Baghdad heard it. Mosul heard it. Even a civilian tower in Kuwait logged the same rhythm beneath normal traffic. It drifted across frequencies like smoke, refusing to anchor itself. Attempts to triangulate it led nowhere. Each reading pointed somewhere different, as though the signal kept moving, or worse, didn't occupy any fixed point at all. Inside the radar bunker, the operator's lounge became a small museum of obsession. Hand-drawn graphs lined the walls, each one a failed attempt to make sense of the pattern. A young technician named Adnan began recording every instance, charting them against wind direction, humidity, and even moon phase. Nothing correlated, but one night, after replaying the data through an analog receiver, he noticed something strange. When slowed down, the signal formed words, not in sound, but in the shape of its oscillation. The waveform itself spelled coordinates, numbers that described a space exactly where the plane had vanished. Adnan showed his superior, who dismissed it with a tired shrug. "Coincidence," he said. "Machines dream when you stare too long." But the technician didn't sleep. By morning, he had tuned an old shortwave radio from his father's house to the same band. The signal was there too, clearer, closer. He brought it into the control room, and everyone heard it. Across the city, old transistor radios began humming on their own, carrying the same slow rhythm, the same inhuman precision. Shopkeepers unplugged them. Mechanics smashed them with wrenches. The sound persisted, faint but insistent, resonating through power lines and open air alike. The sky, it seemed, had become a transmitter. Reports began arriving from beyond Iraq. British intelligence logged shortwave interference spreading westward, while Soviet listening stations claimed it originated in deep space. Each side blamed the other. Secret memos circulated, stamped in red and sealed in black, as if paperwork could contain the hum. None of the documents survived unaltered. Months later, the copies that resurfaced were blank, but smelled faintly of ozone. In Baghdad, a panel of physicists was assembled to study the phenomenon. They gathered in a lecture hall, surrounded by oscilloscopes and miles of tangled cable. The lead researcher, a grey-haired man named Hassan, believed the signal to be an atmospheric echo, a byproduct of overlapping radar sweeps. He demonstrated how energy could bounce between the upper ionosphere and the desert floor, forming standing waves that mimicked intelligence. The others nodded politely. But when he replayed the field recording, something unexpected happened. The waveform shifted. It began looping out of rhythm, creating interference inside the hall's own instruments. One microphone vibrated audibly, producing a tone identical to the field recording but 2 octaves lower. Lights dimmed for exactly 11 seconds. When they returned, the tape had rewritten itself. The recording was still there, but the timestamps had changed. Every entry now preceded the moment it had been recorded. It was as if the signal had learned to arrive before itself. The researchers froze. Someone whispered that it was impossible. But another answered quietly that impossibility was only a word invented to give meaning to repetition. They tried isolating the data on separate drives, each copy degraded differently, as though resisting duplication. A week later, the anomaly spread beyond Iraq's airspace. Civilian pilots reported bursts of static that mimicked their own distress frequencies. Air traffic controllers heard responses from calls they hadn't made yet. For a brief moment, communication became self-aware, a global echo chamber repeating futures not yet spoken. The event lasted just 40 minutes, then vanished. No equipment failed, no evidence remained. Only a deep fatigue settled among the crews who heard it. A mental fog like memory, displaced by something quieter. Back at the radar station, Adnan continued listening long after orders told him to stop. The others moved on to new assignments or convinced themselves it had been interference. He stayed, staring at the monitor's thin green line. It twitched faintly, tracing the same pattern. 5, 3, 1. But slower now, as though breathing. When he leaned closer, he thought he heard faint voices nested in the hum. Laughter, maybe wind, or perhaps something older. The desert remembering what it once contained. He began recording again, filling reels that hissed softly even when not in use. His notes became less technical and more poetic. Sky uncertain. Static seems to think. Pattern matches heartbeat. On the last page, his handwriting breaks mid-sentence, as though interrupted. Beneath it, in a different ink, someone else had written 2 words. Still transmitting. No one knows who added it. Years later, when digital historians reviewed the logs, they noticed that every document from that week shared one identical timestamp. 02.10, the minute Echo Flight sent its final message. Across thousands of kilometers, the hum had recorded its own origin. The data had not aged. To this day, the frequency remains unclaimed. It doesn't interfere with normal communication anymore. It simply exists between stations, a quiet ghost inhabiting the silence of modern skies. Most who hear it dismiss it as atmospheric noise, the familiar comfort of the world running in the background. But for those who've studied it, the ones who understand the precision of 531, the sound carries weight. They describe it not as transmission, but as presence, a lingering proof that something once spoke through the air, and the air, unwilling to forget, kept repeating. And sometimes, on certain nights when humidity climbs and engines idle just right, pilots flying over southern Iraq swear they can feel the same vibration running through their radios. A soft rhythm too deliberate to be random, too patient to be human, pulsing like a quiet question the sky never stopped asking. The cockpit recorder begins like any other mission. Routine chatter, clipped confirmations, the subtle warmth of men who know their instruments better than their own reflections. Then, somewhere past the 2-hour mark, the tape changes. The voices soften, as if the crew suddenly realized they were being overheard by the night itself. Between each line, there's breathing, steady, measured, human. And underneath it, a second rhythm. 5 short pulses, 3 long, 1 faint. It threads through the hum of the engines like a heartbeat stitched to metal. Later, analysts said the plane was still ascending when the first distortion appeared. Altitude, 7,013 meters. The pilot remarked that the stars looked sharper than usual, the horizon unusually clean. The co-pilot agreed, but noted that his altimeter needle trembled, even though the air was calm. The sound of his pencil scratching the log fades halfway through a word. When enhanced, the marks form a pattern, dots and dashes that translate to a single word. Listen. The recording continues for 19 minutes. Voices alternate between professionalism and wonder. One man jokes that the signal might be the Americans testing a new toy, but no one laughs. Someone says he can feel the vibration through his teeth. The pilot orders a systems check. Everything reports nominal, yet the navigation lights dim by half. Outside the glass, the desert below glows faintly, veins of reflected moonlight winding through the dark. At 01:59 hours, the pilot's tone changes. He says, almost conversationally, "It's responding." Ground control hears only static, but on the local intercom, a pattern mirrors his words, soft echoes repeating every sentence 2 seconds late, like a mimic made of electricity. They test the radios, switching frequencies, but the echo follows each one. Eventually, they stop speaking altogether, and the silence inside the cockpit becomes heavy enough to hear. The black box microphone records a faint scraping, perhaps a hand against metal. Then the first whisper, a single phrase, almost kind, altitude 0. The pilot breathes sharply. The altimeter, still in frame, reads 7,000 meters. Karim, the navigator, writes the phrase in his logbook, draws a line beneath it, and folds the page closed. From that moment, no one speaks for nearly 3 minutes. When they do, it's to recite the emergency checklist, each man's voice overlapping slightly, out of sync, as though they were reading from different scripts. The captain repeats, "Maintain heading" twice, but the coordinates he gives don't exist on any map. The desert beneath them is too dark. The river now a single ribbon of pale silver. On the external camera, heat signatures vanish completely. Even the engines give off no measurable warmth. At 0206, the voice returns, not through the headset, but through the fuselage itself, resonating like a tuning fork struck in bone. It speaks in rhythm rather than language, each syllable a measured tone. Later spectrogram analysis showed it contained frequencies below human hearing, layered with subsonic pulses, spaced precisely 72 beats per minute, the average human heart rate. One investigator called it a language of pulse rather than sound. Another called it prayer. The plane drifts higher. The artificial horizon tilts 3 degrees, then rights itself. The pilot's final calm entry reads, "Maintaining level, no turbulence." Static persists. After that, the handwriting ends. A faint clicking begins, consistent and patient. Each click matches the earlier sequence, 5, 3, 1. Then, a brief fragment of speech, a voice not belonging to any of the crew. Return frequency acknowledged. For decades, skeptics argued the tape had been tampered with. But when restored using digital cleaning, the sound of breath remains. 2 distinct human rhythms, then a third entering briefly before fading out. The third does not inhale. The last segment is the hardest to describe. The co-pilot's voice, barely above a whisper, says, "It's not outside anymore." Instruments confirm nothing unusual, yet all metal surfaces begin resonating at a uniform pitch. The cabin pressure gauge dips, recovers. Wind noise vanishes entirely. Even the engines seem to hum in harmony with the unseen signal. A new sound rises from below, low and immense, not loud but vast, as if the earth itself were speaking in reverse. At 0210 hours, the transmission cuts abruptly mid-word. What remains is a single harmonic tone sustained for 11 seconds. Then silence. When the search began, nothing was found. No wreckage, no smoke, not even radar debris. The coordinates given by the final message led investigators to a patch of desert perfectly smooth, as though sand had been poured freshly from the sky. Under satellite view, the terrain displayed faint concentric rings invisible to the naked eye, their diameters matching the frequency spacing of the signal itself. Years later, forensic teams examined the recovered recorder. The magnetic tape showed a curious distortion. Each recorded word pressed deeper into the coil, as though gravity had briefly shifted direction during capture. When digitized, hidden layers appeared, echoes of phrases not spoken aloud, written in frequencies far below the range of speech. They formed one readable sentence. "Do you hear it now?" Those who listened reported odd sensations. A chill on the palms, the feeling of air moving just behind them. Some said the tape carried its own temperature. One technician swore the hum continued even after playback stopped, vibrating faintly through the table. The recording was archived under a new label, Echo Flight, unresolved. The final debrief listed mechanical failure, but none of the instruments showed damage. The report closed with a line added by an anonymous hand. Signal persists without source. In the years that followed, pilots over southern Iraq reported short bursts of static that matched the pattern exactly. Air traffic logs describe brief echoes of their own transmissions repeating seconds before they spoke. None of them considered it haunting. They described it instead as companionship, a reassurance that somewhere, above or beneath, another voice was listening back. Whatever happened aboard Echo Flight didn't end with disappearance. It became absorbed into the atmosphere, folded into the quiet frequencies between storms. When the night is calm enough, the sky still hums, not as a warning, but as remembrance. And in that soft pulse that refuses to fade, the crew's presence endures, measured not in altitude or distance, but in the rhythm that remains when human sound is gone. When the call first broke, No one in the Basra operations tower thought much of it. Static was common, sand carried its own electricity, and the radios sometimes forgot what language to use. But this was different. The sound didn't crackle or fade. It folded inward, like a wave retreating into itself. Controllers heard the pilot's last confirmation, routine, precise, and then nothing. The channel stayed open, transmitting a silence so pure, it sounded engineered. Lieutenant Farid, the night supervisor, tapped his headset twice. "Echo flight, confirm." No reply. He repeated the phrase 3 times, slower each time, as if tone could coax reality back. The hum in the earpiece deepened but offered no echo. His console lights flickered. One by one, green shifted to amber. It looked like the board was holding its breath. For the next 5 minutes, the tower functioned like a clock that refused to stop ticking. Procedures rolled forward, log entry, cross-check, relay to Baghdad center. Yet beneath every word ran the same question that no manual could contain. Where had the sky gone? Farid ordered a frequency sweep. The technicians complied, rotating dials that felt heavier than usual. At 0212 a signal returned, but not from the plane. It came from above their own roof, descending through open space, whispering the same rhythm the flight crew had logged. 5 short, 3 long, 1 low. At first, they thought it was feedback from nearby transmitters. But when they killed power to every antenna, the tone persisted, soft and independent, as if the air itself had learned to speak. The engineer on duty stared at the oscilloscope and muttered that the pattern looked self-correcting. Each pulse realigned to its previous echo with microscopic accuracy, refusing entropy like a living thing preserving heartbeat. By 0220, the base commander had been roused from sleep. He entered the control room wearing an overcoat and disbelief. Reports spread quickly. No radar contact, no emergency beacon, no debris. The flight had evaporated between coordinates 7 and 9. The commander ordered silence. No external communication, no radio leaks. "Until confirmed, it's not missing," he said. The order sounded rational, but the men heard what lay beneath it. Fear disguised as protocol. They replayed the last transmission. On loop, it sounded ordinary until the moment after the pilot said maintaining level. Then came a faint secondary layer, almost imperceptible. The same voice, slower, repeating the sentence half a beat later, as if answering itself from another moment in time. The technician increased gain. The repetition grew clearer, but the second voice was shifted downward in pitch, like gravity pulling on sound. For hours they worked inside that narrow band of disbelief where duty meets myth. Outside, the desert wind fell still. Even the tower windows stopped rattling. The radar screens glowed anemic green over faces drained of certainty. A young controller named Hadi whispered that he could still hear the hum when he removed his headset. Another pressed his palms to the metal desk and felt it vibrating faintly, a rhythm equal to his pulse. At 0305, a secondary report arrived from Kuwait air traffic. Their long-range array had received an identical transmission, but inverted, 5 low, 3 high, 1 flat, as though the message were reflecting off the curve of the world. The 2 stations compared timestamps. They matched perfectly, yet neither could trace origin or altitude. It was as if the sky had become a hall of mirrors, every call chasing its own reflection. By dawn, the commander allowed a limited field search. 2 aircraft swept the sector. Both returned within an hour, claiming clear skies and ordinary weather. From above, nothing suggested disappearance. No smoke, no shimmer, no disturbance in the sand. Still, the tower's instruments continued to pulse every 72 seconds, the same silent heartbeat of echo flight repeating without source. The following day, communications officers from Baghdad arrived to audit the logs. They spoke softly, wrote often, and asked questions that never reached answers. When Farid showed them the recorded frequency, their leader, a thin man with grey on his cuffs, listened once, frowned, and said, "Erase it." Farid hesitated. "It's evidence." The man replied, "It's infection." The tape was removed under guard. That night, the tower's hum returned even louder. Power meters registered no draw, yet the building lights dimmed in unison. Hadi claimed he heard voices layered inside the tone, reciting numbers that matched wind speed over Basra. Others said they heard breathing. No one left the room. They simply waited, listening to a silence that seemed to listen back. When morning came, the signal ceased. The consoles returned to green. Routine resumed by force of habit. Official memos declared a communications fault due to ionospheric reflection. Unofficially, the staff spoke of the moment the air became aware. Within a week, new orders arrived, transferring every controller on duty that night to different bases. None protested. Most left without collecting their personal logs. Farid remained one more shift. Alone in the tower, he rewound the emergency channel recording, one copy he had secretly kept. At first it played blank, only faint background noise. Then, midway through, a whisper surfaced. Altitude 0. The same words from the pilot's log, repeated in the same calm tone. He closed his eyes, rewound again. This time nothing. The tape hissed softly, as though exhaling relief. Before leaving, he typed a single note in the station's final log. Transmission continues without us. He left the paper on the console, folded twice, and walked into the bright morning air. The desert stretched silent to the horizon, ordinary and endless. Somewhere above, frequencies crossed like invisible contrails, messages without senders, signals without homes. For most, the disappearance of Echo Flight became a footnote, but among the few who had heard the hum firsthand, silence never sounded the same again. Even years later, when they manned new towers across other borders, they swore that between each routine call and response, there lived a small pause, half a heartbeat, where something vast waited to be remembered. And in that brief interval, when language held its breath, the sky seemed to listen back. The first disappearance was small, a single reel missing from the archive shelf. It should have been unremarkable. Paperwork misplaced itself all the time, but the label on the box read Echo Flight, primary band, and everyone in the communications wing remembered signing for it. The clerk swore he'd sealed it himself, placed it behind the numbered files where routine goes to sleep. Yet when the drawers were opened, the slot was empty, and the air smelled faintly of ozone, like the moment after lightning without any storm. At first, the staff blamed error. Inventories were redone, new copies ordered, the system retagged under maintenance review. Still, more reels vanished. The following week, entire sections of data tapes from neighboring bases turned up blank, magnetic stripes perfectly clean, as though memory had been polished away. Some reels emitted a faint hum when held close to the ear, a low vibration that stopped the moment they were set down. It was not feedback, not machinery. It was too alive. Archivists in Baghdad's Central Records Office began calling it the fade, a quiet joke that stopped being funny after the third department reported it. Files, both analog and digital, were dissolving like ink under sunlight. The phenomenon refused pattern. One day it devoured field logs. Another day, personal letters. Another day, just the sound portions of taped interviews. Each time, the result was immaculate emptiness. Paper intact. Tape unwrinkled. Code uncorrupted, yet content erased. When questioned, the custodians described hearing a short tone before discovering the loss. Some said it sounded like a distant radio tuning. Others compared it to a heartbeat played through glass. Engineers dismantled machines searching for hidden magnets or sabotage. None found anything. "It's as if the data is forgetting itself," one technician muttered. The phrase lingered in reports until sensors struck it out. In the military debriefs that followed, officers avoided metaphors. They called it demagnetization anomaly, memory fatigue, clerical malfunction. But even the most rational among them noticed peculiar consistencies. Every wiped file contained references to Echo Flight or to frequencies beginning with 531. The pattern refused coincidence. One evening, Colonel Hassan, the physicist who had testified before the investigation board, was invited to inspect the central archive vault. He found it strangely cold inside, the kind of chill that seems to radiate inward rather than out. Rows of shelves stood like frozen ribs. Technicians hovered over readers, projecting silent reels onto white screens. The images, topographic scans, radar sweeps, cockpit footage, played normally until a specific time code. At 02:10 hours, each one blinked white, held still for 11 seconds, then resumed blank. Hassan leaned closer. On the edge of the screen, faint grey lines shimmered, almost like handwriting trying to form letters. He ordered the frame frozen, enlarged, inverted. The image clarified into pulse-like curves, repeating at rhythmic intervals. The same old pattern, 531. "It's not deletion," he whispered. "It's replacement." By dawn, the vault lights had dimmed to half power. Generators tested fine, yet illumination thinned as though filtered through fog. The technicians packed up early, uneasy with their own shadows. Each appeared slightly delayed against the wall, as if reflection had lost synchronization. The next morning, Hassan's report vanished before it reached headquarters. The messenger carried only an empty envelope stamped received. Rumors spread through the ranks. Some claimed the recordings hadn't been erased but absorbed, that the signal, whatever it was, had begun migrating into magnetic surfaces, feeding on memory like a slow contagion. The theory sounded absurd until one of the officers played a blank reel aloud and heard faint breathing behind the hiss. When he rewound it, the sound disappeared, but the room remained cold for hours. Soon after, a sealed order arrived from Intelligence Command. All Echo flight materials were to be consolidated into a single secure location, codename Vault 9. The vault was built beneath a disused airstrip south of Baghdad, its corridors narrow and unlit beyond necessity. Each night, guards reported hearing distant tapping from within the storage units. Maintenance crews confirmed no mechanical source. Eventually, guards were rotated every 4 hours to reduce fatigue, though none slept afterward. Inside Vault 9, time acquired a strange elasticity. Clocks drifted, watches ran out of sync. Tapes stored there occasionally produced flashes of sound without activation. Short bursts of tone, sometimes a full sentence, spoken in the calm voice of a pilot. Altitude 0. Maintain listening. Scientists logged these incidents meticulously until the paper began vanishing from their clipboards before signatures dried. By late spring, even the digital backups succumbed. Drives displayed correct file sizes but opened to blank grey screens. Encryption teams tried restoring bit by bit, but each attempt erased a little more. At one point, a computer rebooted by itself and displayed a single message across the monitor. "We remember for you." It disappeared when photographed. The project head resigned that same night. He left a note typed on manual paper. "Nothing that listens forgets completely." His office light was found still on in the morning, its bulb vibrating softly though switched off. Within months, Vault 9 was sealed. Officially, the material was moved to an undisclosed research partner. Unofficially, the hallways filled with dust and the faint scent of static. Workers said you could still hear the tapes turning somewhere deep below, though no electricity fed the machines. Meanwhile, outside the sealed compound, fragments of the vanished recordings began to reappear. Snatches of the lost signal captured accidentally on civilian transmissions. A trucker in northern Syria picked up 5 tones while scanning for music. A weather balloon in Jordan transmitted 3 low pulses, then 1 high. Amateur radio enthusiasts shared clips online, none longer than 11 seconds, each ending in silence too clean to be ordinary. For those who listened carefully, the fragments carried depth, not noise, but space as if the sound had dimension. Some claimed to hear faint voices folded within, repeating sentences from the debriefings long erased. Still transmitting, one whisper said, identical to the handwriting on Adnan's final notebook page years before. By the time the ministry issued its official statement, no anomalies detected. Most of the original personnel had been reassigned, yet every so often, one of them would find an old cassette in a drawer or a forgotten file on a disc. When played, nothing emerged at first. Then, under the hiss, a tone surfaced. The same patient rhythm. 5, 3, 1. It lasted precisely 72 beats before fading, leaving behind that familiar chill in the palms, as if the recording were watching the listener instead of the other way around. In later years, historians searching for evidence of the case found nothing but metadata, timestamps without titles, references to files that had never existed. And yet, across multiple archives, a single phrase persisted, attached to no author, embedded like residue in the margins. The recordings never disappeared. They simply moved to quieter frequencies, even now, on nights when the desert wind dies and electronics hum softer than breath. Those frequencies whisper faintly through abandoned transmitters. Memory replaying itself in code, the sky speaking back through the emptiness it created. Years passed, and Basra forgot how to look upward. The war lines shifted, the towers changed, and the river kept its slow brown patience. Yet beneath the new noise of engines and politics, something older continued to breathe, a faint vibration that lived in the static between stations. Pilots spoke of it only when the night stretched too long, a rhythm that visited once a year, The sound of 531, a code stripped of meaning yet unwilling to end. In 1997, a meteor tracking satellite recorded a thin line of light passing over southern Iraq. It wasn't meteoric. It didn't burn. The streak held constant temperature, white and slow, as though remembering how to descend. Operators assumed reflection until they noticed that every sensor near Basra froze for 11 seconds. No data loss, just suspended time. The clock resumed cleanly, yet the gap remained. 11 seconds where the world simply chose not to measure. That was when the technicians found it again. A pulse folded into the telemetry, identical to the one lost decades earlier. It came not from space, but from the ground. Coordinates matched the old search grid, a shallow stretch of desert no one had bothered to map since the flight. Satellite imagery showed nothing but flat sand and faint rings, each spaced 72 meters apart, like sound waves made visible. When the images were color inverted, the rings glowed pale blue, not reflection, but emission, light without heat. A small team was sent to investigate, though no record of their names remains. The declassified footage survived only in fragments. A vehicle idling under a grey sky, wind asleep, an officer adjusting his collar as the microphone catches that same rhythmic tone in the background. He asks the technician to confirm range. The answer arrives half a second early. Then the recording ends, as if the camera decided to blink. After that, the crew was transferred without public mention. The region fell quiet again, but silence in Basra was never innocent. Radio operators on commercial frequencies began hearing delayed echoes of their own broadcasts returning from the south. Each echo lasted exactly 7 words before fading, regardless of language or subject. An American contractor stationed near the port transcribed his own repeat and found it had spelled, in Arabic Morse, altitude 0. He never broadcast again. Scholars and scientists kept trying to explain it. They blamed solar refraction, data feedback, cosmic dust. But each theory collapsed when tested outside the region. Only Basra spoke that way. Only its air seemed capable of memory. The pattern remained local, intimate, as if the sky had chosen its own listener and refused to translate for anyone else. By the early 2000s, digital satellites caught brief white flares over the old flight corridor every winter. They lasted between 9 and 11 seconds, never longer, never shorter. Each one registered as non-thermal. When analyzed spectrally, their signature matched that of the original anomaly recorded in the Echo Flight cockpit mic, a cold light that produced its own frequency of silence. Scientists called it a coincidence. Those who had been there knew better. One of them, Lieutenant Farid, now old and retired, kept a shortwave receiver by his window. Each night he turned it on and listened for the gap between stations. Sometimes, in the thin hum between waves, he heard faint breathing followed by a gentle click of switches. Once, half asleep, he heard a voice he recognized, steady, professional, calm. It said only 2 words. Maintain listening. He did. Until his death, the receiver remained on, its dial frozen just beyond any numbered band, where frequencies rest when they no longer belong to machines. Today, locals still speak of the returning sky, the night when Basra's rooftops flicker with pale light that casts no shadow. Children watch in silence. Dogs do not bark. Phones record nothing but a steady hum. For 11 seconds each year, the world seems to pause and listen to something beneath its own memory. Then everything resumes, as if the air had merely remembered how to breathe. Perhaps that is all it ever wanted. Not to haunt, not to warn, but to be heard again. Some fires burn with flame, others with persistence. The echo did not vanish. It simply moved into a quieter form, one that needs no light to exist. Somewhere between earth and sky, between signal and silence, it waits, steady, faithful, and alive in the way memory is alive. When the world finally forgets the names and numbers, when the records have all gone blank, that soft pulse will remain. 5, 3, 1. The sky's way of saying it never stopped listening.